Good afternoon, and thank you for attending our webinar, Extreme Weather, Prepare, Predict, and Protect. My name is Carl Nixon. I'm the events manager here at SunGard Availability Services, and I'm going to hand you over now to Will Owen, who works in our Business and Resilience Consultancy team, to lead you through this webinar. He'll also be supported by John Beattie. Will, please take it away.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, for those of you in the UK, and hello, welcome for those of you joining us from other parts of the world, and welcome to the latest of SunGard's series of webinars. For those of you that have been watching the earlier ones, they have been mainly on the global COVID pandemic for obvious reasons, but today we're going to talk about extreme weather, and towards the end of the discussion, how these two issues interact. So, as Carl might have said just now, my name is Will Owen, and I lead on resilience to weather and climate here at SunGard as part of the resilience consulting team. And my colleague John Beattie, who has a similar role in the United States team, will be joining me on this webinar. So we're looking at three things today. We're looking at the effects that extreme weather can have. So that helps you kind of prepare the sorts of things that might occur. We're going to talk about prediction, where you can go and get advice about what's going to happen. And then towards the end, we're going to talk about protection, the sorts of things that you can do to address the potential for disruption to business. There's a slot for Q&A at the end. But if you want to rack up some questions during the presentation, please feel free. There's an opportunity on your screen, I think, to do that. And I think Carl will then pose those questions at the end. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, John, who's going to set the scene on business resilience. So, John.
Will, thank you very much. I'd like to start our conversation today with a model that we here at SunGard use to kind of describe the holistic view of business resilience, of operational resilience. And what you can see on the screen now is an image for what you likely recognize as a commercial bank. So they have a mission. They have various products and services, checking, savings, mortgages, and of course many more things that they offer. And they deliver that through branch operations. They have lending operations and many more activities that directly support their products and services. But also on the back end, of course, there are many different activities that take place. Treasury and financial services and human resources, information security operations, all the things that happen on the back end of most organizations. But of course, as we can see from this model, that in that bottom row, that those activities are all dependent upon a variety of resources. And the major ones that we typically look at are, workplace and the equipment within it, the workforce, all of the people, the contract workers, that are working on your behalf to undertake the activities and deliver the products and services, third parties that are integral to your organization and your ability to be effective, IT services, the application systems, network services that are also important to business today, and then of course the data that those systems rely on and that's important to the organization. And what operational resilience, business resilience is about is what happens if I take any of those resources away from you. Well, we're all experiencing right now with the pandemic that our primary workplaces, for the most part, except for essential services, have been taken away from us. And maybe to a small degree, some of our workforce has been depleted. Folks might be ill, folks might be on furlough. So we have had personnel that we need to do our work taken away from us. Third parties. In some cases, we've had some disruptions in supply chains. We've seen reductions in, service levels from some organizations as they adapt to this, temporary normal. IT services, for the most part, haven't been stretched too far. There's the occasional issues that have happened. Certainly, more cyber attacks or cyber attack attempts have been taking place. So we can see from this particular model that where business resilience is focused around the unavailability of key resources, and how does the business react? How do those business activities react? So now surrounding this is a whole lot of information, actually. So what you can see here are all of the different policies, plans, protocols, processes, procedures that should be in place as part of an overall business resilience program within organizations. And you can see, up in the top here, there's, crisis management, crisis communications, your business continuity plans, emergency response plans that would be focused around, that are workplace focused, and they tend to focus on, suspicious packages, suspicious people, fires that might, things that may take place in the workplace. Down here, which kind of spans workplace, workforce, and even third party to a degree, are your severe, weather season preparedness. So, cyclones in India, wildfires in California, hurricanes in the Gulf states. You can go around the world and identify, what is the, severe weather of choice, across organizations, and having the plans that help you prepare for that are of course important. And again, we can see disaster recovery and over here on the right, cyber compromise, data recovery management plans, data recovery plans, and this is more in response to successful cyber attacks that compromise data. So if all of these things are working in place, we believe that organizations would have an effective business resilience program. And what's also important as a last point to talk about here on this slide is that these things do have a strong degree of interdependence and integration, and where many organizations kind of fall short is on making sure that all of these silos all come together into a holistic program. But today we're talking about severe weather that kind of spans down here in this lower left-hand corner, as you can see me circling, and we're going to focus primarily on that particular topic. So moving on to our next topic, the next discussion is, it's important to maintain a constant state of awareness about potential and realized disruptive events, across all geographies, where you do business, and also where your third parties do business. And so the horizon scanning is a key element of most organizations, most business resilience programs. Anticipating what's coming, anticipating how it might escalate, anticipating how it might impact your organization and the organizations of your third parties and even of your customers. If they're going to be impacted by a particular weather event, then they may well be unavailable. They may need to temporarily cease buying services or products from your organization. So it's important to be taking a look across weather and other events. Horizon scanning proved to be very effective and in many cases ineffective during the recent pandemic. We all saw this thing coming in many ways, but many organizations were slow to react and never thinking it would amount to much in their local geographies. And the last point to make here on this slide is that having the right culture in an organization, the right resilience culture that goes right to the top, has proven to be something that organizations are if they didn't already have it, they're certainly thinking about it now. I'm going to turn this back to Will now, and he's going to be talking about what you should be preparing for. Will?
Thanks, John. I'm having a little bit of a glitch with the slides, so could you move the slide on to slide 4, please? Okay, so we're going to talk now in this section about what you should be preparing for, and we're going to look at 4 regions, North America, Europe, and then we're going to have a quick look at 2 areas where many companies have outsourced supply, and that is to India and China. Okay, so we're going to go to the next slide, please, John. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing a slide which is titled the United States 2019 Billion Dollar Weather and Climate Disasters, and thanks to the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration for this graphic. And subsequent ones. This shows the different types of billion-dollar weather and climate disasters for the United States for 2019. And there are 6 different categories: droughts, heat waves, winter storms, tropical cyclones, flooding, wildfires, and severe local storms. And all of those were experienced at some point or other in 2019 in the States, apart from droughts and heat waves. These are all hugely disruptive events, and they're characterized by 3 things. First of all, huge scale. So often if you're affected by a business continuity disruption, it can be a relatively low scale. These events are of enormous size. They're often or usually of very long duration, and the after effects often exceed the actual event by several orders of magnitude. So if you look at the event in the Mississippi River, you'll see there that was from March the 15th until July the 31st. So again, significant duration of event which you need to be aware of. Okay, next slide, please, John. Okay, so this slide is showing you a different view of the same thing, which is the climate disasters frequency mapping, but now over the full period from 1980 to last year. So you can see in this slide that every single state of the United States is affected in some way by one or more of these billion-dollar events, and often many of them. And if you're unfortunate enough from this perspective to be in Texas or Florida, you get affected by all of them at one time or another. So you really need to be thinking, if you're based here or you have offices in this part of the world, about all of these potential weather events affecting your business. Okay, next slide, please. So we're now looking at a slide showing the frequency of these kind of events for the states. And as you can see, that frequency is rising. Now, there is an element of this that relates to the value of assets at risk. So when the same event happens now, it costs more because there are more things disrupted. But that's also a significant increase in frequency in extreme weather events. So the implication of that is if you're the kind of organization that has a risk threshold around, for example, a 1 in 50-year event, you may need to look again at what a 1 in 50-year event actually is. It's more likely to be more disruptive than you thought. So it's a good prompt to have a look again at those kinds of risk management approaches to weather events. Okay, next slide, please. So what we're going to do now is move our focus to Europe. And this slide just again looks back at 2019. So following the theme of looking at the kinds of things that are being experienced in the geographies that we operate in. And this is just convective storms only. And you can see that they're A, all over Europe, and B, the date ranges are quite interesting. You have 2 clusters. You have a summer cluster, June, July, August, which obviously we're just about to get into. And then we have a winter cluster, so September, October, December, January. So again, all over the year and all over Europe, these kinds of things are going to affect you. Okay, next slide, please. So this slide has a build. I think if you're seeing it blank, John, if you can advance it to the first picture, which should be the Eiffel Tower. As with USA, we get all types of extreme weather in Europe. Again, it's just an opportunity to go through as a reminder the kinds of things that affect us. So we have winter storms. So if you can just add the second one, there's a little picture of some waves hitting the coastline there. Massive winter storms affecting Europe in 1990, 99, 2007, 2010, 2018. Next slide, please, John. Should be a flood, huge summer flood of 2002, and then heat waves in the next build, which is 2003, 2010. And then finally, the last images of the wildfires, which you may remember from last year. So in fact, they were 2019, 18, 17, and then back 2010 and 2003. So again, the same kinds of events that are affecting the United States, affecting Europe as well. Okay, next slide, please. Looking in this slide at India, so a very interesting study just came out by Accenture, talking about digital grid electricity system, and saying that actually the weather in India has been extremely challenging and is increasingly challenging the electricity distribution network infrastructure. So again, if you're based there or have suppliers based there, it's well worth thinking that they may actually be remote from the immediate effects of weather events, but if the electricity network is disrupted, it will affect them. And again, the image on the right is of huge rain in Mumbai, again, reasonably frequently experienced in that part of the world. So next slide, please, John. So this slide is talking about some big numbers about the impact of weather disruption. On the left, 630 billion relates to weather variability in the United States economy, and on the right, the European sort of loss against extremes. But actually, the more important number for those in businesses is really around the cost to you of weather. And I put the question out there, does any of you really know if you've got any information about historic impact of weather on your business? It's a good number to try and understand because it helps you contextualize the sort of investments that you should be putting into maybe prevent damage in the future. Okay, so that's really the end of that first section, looking at the sorts of things that happen. And you can see that there's a big range of them, and any of them can happen in most parts of the places that we operate in. The next section we're going to look at is, if you move the slide on, please, is what's the prediction? What are people saying? What can we say about the next few weeks and months? And I guess the first thing I would say is that actually many people, particularly in the UK, have a sort of instinctive suspicion of weather forecasting. They're generally not that impressed by the quality. But it's important to note that over the last probably 10, 12 years, there's been an absolutely enormous investment in forecasting technology, both at government and in advanced technology companies, to step change the quality of forecasting. And that relates to satellite technology, data processing. And so if you're in that world where you're sort of not sure what's available, it's time to have another look. So we'll have a quick canter through some of that just now. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So this slide is taken from the World Economic Forum's annual Global Risks Report. So every year in January, they publish a report about what's coming up in the future, addressing a whole range of different risks. But the interesting thing on this graphic shows on the left-hand side is the likelihood of disruption from various colored categories, and on the right-hand side, the impact. And the green relates to environmental risks. So you can see that over the years, the likelihood of environmental risk has increased year on year, so that now all 5 of the top risks that the world faces are considered to be environmentally based. And on the right, the 3 of the 5 biggest impacts are environmentally based. And if we look at the next slide, please, you'll see that for just 2020, the top of that list is extreme heat waves at 88.8%. A couple down from that is that 5th one there is uncontrolled fires. So 2 big weather-related issues that are top of the list and 5th on the list of those short-term risks. So again, whilst you can't necessarily predict the specific location, there's an interesting steer there about what kinds of things it might be relevant to think about. Next slide, please. So this one, again, I think will build with some images of suppliers of forecasts. So if we start with the first one, you should be able to see NOAA and the National Weather Service imagery there. That's representing the United States National Hurricane Center and the Storm Prediction Center. So again, 2 places that will give you very good information about what's going on in terms of extreme weather at various different ranges. The next image should be Environment Canada. And again, interesting thing about Canada, if you're based there or you operate there, is that they experience so much extreme weather that they almost say that pretty much everything should be expected. So in a sense, they're saying, look, you should prepare for anything. But that is a good source. They have a severe weather site where you can get really good information about what's going on in the future in Canada. The next one is the UK Met Office. Again, good source information. They do a seasonal forecast. They do a monthly forecast, but they go out beyond that, give you some good steers about what's going on. And the next image is for the European Centre for Medium Range Weather Forecasting. Again, on the European scale, a great source of information for seasonal forecasts for Europe. And just to say that all of these links to these will be available after the webinar. Coming on to the bottom rank of imagery, we should see now the image from Meteor Alarm. It's a European-sponsored website where you can search for specific types of alerts by country, and that's built on all of the information from the European weather forecasting agencies. The next image is for the Indian Met Service. Again, very good source of great information for our part of the world. Penultimate image is the Chinese Met Service. Again, similarly good links. And of course, the final one is the World Meteorological Organization. And again, they will aggregate and provide forecast information of good quality at a whole different series of ranges. So back to our thinking about what's been predicted and what's happened, what's been experienced. Often people say, well, weather happens, but actually it's very, very rare that a weather event occurs without some form of warning, often several weeks warning. And it's well worth bearing that in mind as you're thinking about the kind of horizons for what you're looking to do. So if we move to the next slide, by complete coincidence, NOAA is announcing its 2020 Atlantic hurricane forecast right now. So as we speak, they're having their press conference, and they will be releasing that information, I imagine, in about half an hour. So those of you that are based there or you're interested in operations there, you can get that information fairly shortly. But if we go to the next slide, we can see that actually a couple of forecast operations decided to get their forecasts out early, and you'll see the average of named storms, hurricanes, and Cat 3 or higher storms on the left. And last year was above average, and this year both Colorado State University and the Weather Company are both predicting more hurricanes for this season than before. So taken with what NOAA has to say, and the sort of leaking is that that's going to happen, we can expect this to be a more active than usual hurricane season for the rest of this year. If we go to the next slide, I've just taken an extract from one of the products that's available from the European Centre. So you should be able to see two maps of Europe. And they are available for each month going out to the future. I've just taken August as an example. And you can see that these show the difference from what you would expect to be happening for those months for those locations. So on the left, you can see that it's expecting for large areas of Europe to be much hotter than normal in August. And on the right-hand side, we can see the rainfall. You can see that a band of Europe towards the south is expected to be drier, and to the north, slightly wetter. So again, these are available at different ranges, different months. Again, you can start getting some feel for what's expected over the next few months in this geography, and particularly in Europe. Okay, if we go to the next slide, please. So we're now really going to conclude this section about two particularly unfortunate parts of the world at the moment. On the left, we see a satellite image from a couple of days ago about this severe cyclone which is just making landfall in Kolkata, and it's taking a dramatic hit there. News scenes of massive disruption. And the big issue they've got there, of course, is that they're all trying to socially distance, so the occupation of hurricane shelters and so on was much down on what it should be in the circumstances, which just makes it much more difficult to cope with what's going on. And on the right, you've got images of two dams that have burst in the state of Michigan in the last couple of days. The result of, I think, 4 or 5 days of heavy rainfall, and the city of Midland has been flooded under about 9 feet of water. And the governor there declared a state of emergency with a predicted historic high water level. But interestingly, the headquarters of Dow Chemical is in Midland, and Dow has announced it's activated its flood preparedness plan. But again, it'd be interesting to know, they've got a distributed workforce now, one assumes, all working from home. Where is their computing? Is it still in that building? Is it in the cloud? I imagine this is making a really challenging environment for that company and for many, many others. So that concludes the second section of the webinar. So I'll hand back to John for the final part, which is how do you protect your business?
Thank you, Will, and thank you for getting us all thinking a little bit beyond the pandemic and what may be happening for the remainder of 2020 with regard to severe weather. And obviously, many of us need to be thinking about how do we protect our business from severe weather events, like what is currently happening in parts of India, what is currently happening in Michigan, and the compound effect that has on in conjunction with working remote. And there's clearly a lot to be thinking about there. I want to come back to the picture that I had displayed earlier, just to kind of reinforce. You can see some of the text is here in red. So when you're considering your severe weather planning, you do need to be thinking about the integration and your ability for crisis management, for crisis communication. Crisis communication, of course, is focused on making sure that you can alert people to something that is about to happen or has happened, and it's about keeping people aware along the way as to what's changing and as a result of whatever event is taking place. Of course, your business continuity plans, site-specific emergency plans. So all of these plan types, if you will, that are in red, do need to be ready and up for test and up for use, in the severe weather event. As many of these elements also played a role, of course, in our pandemic responses. So making sure that all of these pieces come together, and addressing your lessons learned from the pandemic certainly makes sense now in anticipation of severe weather season, which is we're just entering in many parts of the world. So compound crises, do happen, and we can expect an unprecedented amount of that for 2020 and perhaps beyond. So it's really important to make sure that your organization, is really ready to respond to what we're referring to as a compound crisis. What we're seeing in some organizations is that they're actually beginning to think about having some tabletop exercises so that they can evaluate based on where they are. If they're in California, here in the States, what do we do if there's wildfires and people are working from home, so that the primary workplace for the moment and for many organizations is the home. Folks are working there, except for those folks that are considered essential, providing essential services. What happens if those wildfires disrupt the home and people therefore have no place to work? Or there's a regional power outage as a result of a wildfire or a snowstorm or a major tropical storm, and folks lose their power and their ISP service. How do we respond to that? How does business continue to go if we can't bring people back to the office? In some cases, maybe we can. So how do we balance all of that going forward? And again, those kinds of conversations are happening in some organizations, and I'm sure should be happening in more. So really, it's important to have the right mindset, if you will, around what can happen, so that you don't get caught short in the upcoming season here. So it's important to review what's in place, review your unavailability of workforce, unavailability of workplace, assumptions that are underlying your plans. Make sure that you are ready for those compound events. Many organizations are thinking about, should their personnel, people's homes be now considered critical workplaces? Should they be doing more around cyber protection, in the home space, and rethinking any security controls that they may have relaxed in order to enable people to work effectively from home. And probably the most important thing that I think organizations have realized as a result of the pandemic, and it certainly holds true for severe weather situations, is, do you really have concentration risk? And what I mean by that is, are all of the people who know how to do something, are they all working in the same facility? I have one particular client in the New York area, and they have two different offices nearby one another. And they've decided, as they bring people back from the pandemic, they're going to be having some of those folks go to Office A and some of those folks go to Office B. so that they don't have everybody that is potentially going to be impacted by a resurgence in illness all sitting in the same facility. And the same goes for severe weather events. Are all of the people that have expertise in a particular subject area, are they all working from the same office within the same geography, and might they all be impacted by the exact same event? So I think it's important for organizations to be thinking about concentration risk, certainly within their supply chain and with the having diversification across the products and services they get from third parties, but also internally as well, and making sure that no one location, no one geography is, if there is a disruption in that area due to weather or anything else, would severely impact the organization. So concentration risk is now top of mind in many organizations as a result of the pandemic, and that thinking should continue as you think about and preparing for severe weather events. So it's important to continue testing. If any testing that may have been done on a IT disaster recovery perspective, if you haven't, if you put those things on hold in anticipation of severe weather events, which have a much stronger likelihood of impacting your IT infrastructure, than the pandemic did, you might want to make sure you can get some of that testing out of the way, especially if you're in a severe weather high risk zone. Of course, making sure that you do some of your business continuity exercises and tests, at least the ones that you haven't already put to the test as a result of the pandemic. It's important to do that as well. Again, if something has been postponed, you might want to do it. And truly highly recommend that executive level tabletop exercises be undertaken, particularly if you start thinking about the compound effect of the pandemic, with folks working remote and the severe weather, it makes sense to bring that to the attention of executives. So finally, my final thought here is, before I turn it back over to Will, is that it's important to keep an eye on the forecast. It's important to have proper horizon scanning when you see something coming. I think many organizations or executives are going to be well prepared to deal with it and are more sensitive to what might be coming and what might happen and how it might impact them and also third-party suppliers. Review all your assumptions in your business resilience program. Are you less resilient, more resilient now that we've experienced the widespread home working as a result of COVID-19? Again, review your supply and technology and supply chain choices. Do you have the appropriate levels of flexibility? And flexibility is now a very important word, as is resilience. Many organizations, we kind of are using the term, are reimagining resilience within their organizations from the top down. And of course, continue your testing. So I'm going to turn this back over to Will now.
Thank you very much, John. So I guess 2 more slides before we wrap up some questions. First one is how we can help. So as I'm sure you're aware, this is SunGard's core territory. We've helped over 1,000 recovery efforts. We've done 10,000 disaster recovery tests, and there are many more statistics like that to talk about. So we're well placed to support you in any aspects of planning for and reacting to these kinds of stresses. And as John said, reduce your concentration risk and think about geographic diversity in the threat of large-scale extreme weather events. So if we can go to the next slide, just to conclude then, so we have a few points here really. What lies ahead does depend on where you're located. We've looked at the kinds of things that have happened, so you've got an idea of the sorts of things you should be expecting. It's not about guessing. You can get really good advice about what's going to happen and start thinking about raising your understanding and awareness of what the forecasters are saying. You've got these three topics which we talked through: prepare, predict, and protect. And I think it's fair to say that at some point or other, many or most organizations will be affected in one way or another by severe weather. So thank you very much for listening. And John and I will be pleased to answer any questions. I think Carl's going to moderate on our behalf.
Brilliant. Thanks, Will. Thanks, John. Yes, we do have a couple of questions in. I've got a first one here that's coming. I think it's to do with a lot of the abbreviations that we use. So, John, I think it was you that mentioned COLO, IaaS, and also SaaS as well. Could you just confirm what those actually mean? I would understand them as being co-location, infrastructure as a service, and software as a service.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, co-location meaning I'm going to rent a computer room space or a computer cage space, and the provider gives you the a secured place, gives you the power, gives you the network, so that you can implement put your hardware into that particular facility. So it gets you out of the business of having to manage a data center and put it in the hands of organizations that do that for a living. So that's what colo means. Infrastructure as a service is basically an element is one perspective on cloud services where you're actually buying hardware, compute power, data storage from a provider like an AWS or a Microsoft Azure, and many other cloud providers. So that is probably the dominant element of when people talk about the cloud. Infrastructure as a service is the majority of that, but there's other elements of that as well. And software as a service is where you're using a third party, maybe an SAP, or using a Salesforce, or many different kinds of systems that are out there where you're simply buying time and buying access to those systems that you use in your own way. But that infrastructure and those systems are being provided by a third party.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks for answering that, John. And I've got another question. It kind of tags along quite nicely into that, which I might get Will to answer. It says, what is the likely impact of extreme weather on cloud-based services?
Yeah, thank you. So that's an interesting one. So again, often people outsource a lot of their IT activity into the cloud, and then by doing that, they think, I'm taking away some of this risk. But actually, if you look at the statistics, you'll see that major cloud computing centers are vulnerable, particularly to lightning strikes. And there are a number of instances over recent years where major providers have been affected and seen quite significant outages in relation to their services. So again, it's just worth bearing in mind, if you live in a part of the world or you see where, if you outsource to data providers, you should think, where are they physically locating their services, and extreme weather can affect that.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks for that, Will. I've got another one here, which I think will be for John. It's to do with your building block slides that you had. It said, on the building block slide, there are many plan types. Does every organization need to have them all to have a good resilience program?
Well, the answer to that is not everyone, certainly has them all, and they have effective programs. So the answer is no. You don't need them all. But what we advocate to our clients is that they at least consider those. So if you're in certain parts of the country, you may not need that severe weather, or parts of the world. The severe weather issue may not be as dominant for you as it is in other areas. But in many cases, if you have a third-party vendor who's located in a severe weather target area, you might want to be asking them questions about their business resilience program. So that guide not only helps you determine what you think you need in your organization. Do you need a crisis management plan? Do you need a business continuity plans? Do you need disaster recovery plans? And the answer is, many of those plan types that are on there, yes, you do need. You need some of them for sure, but do you need all of them? No, it's going to be situationally dependent.
Okay, brilliant, excellent. Thanks for that, John. I think I've got another one here for you. We're all living remote working to one degree or another. So what exercises do you believe need to be conducted to get ready for any severe weather event?
Well, we certainly all exercise the ability to work remotely, and certainly a key element of severe weather response, a major strategy in being prepared for severe weather is being able to to work remotely and to be able to transfer work out of region, out of the area that has been impacted. So we're certainly living the remote thing. In quite heavily, so no need for exercises there. However, it is important to be thinking about exercises, as I mentioned before, where you're going to be moving, if there is a hurricane, and I have worked with several clients over the past few years who have been impacted heavily by hurricanes, and a key element of their strategies was to be able to transfer that work to another part of the country where they also had locations. So that concentration risk issue, will a severe weather event like some of the major storms, Hurricane Sandy, Hurricane Harvey, that happened here in the States, of course, they only impact a small geography within the U.S. So the ability to be able to move work, to other locations is very important. I know many financial institutions, in Florida here in the States, when they see a hurricane coming, they will actually relocate people to other parts of Florida who are performing key services. It might be in their call centers or some of their IT support folks. So they'll pack them up and move them. So doing exercises around that to make sure everybody's ready, to pack up and go. Any exercises or tests that validate your ability to address concentration risk, I think are very important when preparing for severe weather.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, John. And I think we've got time for one last question before we go, and I might get you to answer this one if you can. What type of weather events cause the most financial loss?
Thanks, Carl. So that's really flooding. So if you can imagine, those kinds of events are massively disruptive because they overwhelm buildings, often have IT systems in basements, for example, and they get flooded out, and it takes a huge amount of time and effort to clean up after a flood. So there's no doubt that is the one area where the most economic damage, the big insurance claims across Europe in the last few years, all been related to flood events, unfortunately.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, thank you for that, Will. I think that is pretty much all we've got time for today. Thank you very much to everyone who joined us. We'll be releasing some information on next month's webinars and Q&As for those who are SunGard customers. But thank you once again. And if you want to view this webinar on demand, you can use the same link that you used before, pass it on to your colleagues, and they'll be able to watch the webinar in its entirety. Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining.